Previously, we met Bob Lazar and the secret base called S4. Now we go into how the world reacted and what the science really says. As the dust settled, the world responded slowly, with ripples through government halls, scientific institutions, conspiracy circles, and late-night radio. The first wave came from the media. Local outlets treated Lazar as a curiosity, a quirky whistleblower with a wild tale. As national attention rose, so did criticism. Mainstream press painted him as deluded or opportunistic, his lack of documentation an obvious flaw. Still, there were cracks. A few journalists found odd coincidences, people around Lazar who refused to speak, records that once existed but vanished, security clearances he referenced with uncanny accuracy. Those hints suggested insider knowledge. The scientific community split. Many physicists and engineers dismissed Lazar outright, citing the impossibility of manipulating gravity and faster-than-light travel. A smaller group reacted differently, with curiosity rather than endorsement. What if, they asked, the propulsion aligned with theoretical ideas like wormholes, space-time curvature, or gravitational lensing? These were real concepts of advanced physics, and Lazar, though lacking pedigree, spoke their language. In UFO circles, Lazar became a prophet. Conferences quoted his testimony, amateur analysts sketched S4 diagrams, hobbyists recreated gravity amplifier schematics in 3D. His story became a framework that tied together other anomalies, Roswell, Rendlesham, Tic Tac sightings, all fitting into a single narrative of black projects and reverse engineering. Even inside government, his claims could not be entirely ignored. Closed-door hearings probed aspects of his story. No confirmations emerged, but silence sometimes spoke volumes in the opaque world of black budgets. In 2017, the New York Times revealed the Pentagon had funded a secret UFO program, the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program, or ATIP. Suddenly, Lazar seemed less far-fetched. Department of Defense videos showed Navy pilots encountering unknown craft moving with instantaneous acceleration and defying inertia. Many saw parallels to Lazar's descriptions. Public interest surged. UFOs, now often called UAPs, moved from fringe to mainstream. Serious institutions started asking serious questions. In the background, Lazar's name resurfaced. Podcasts, documentaries, and YouTube channels reignited debate. Was Lazar the original whistleblower or an early fabricator who guessed right on some points? Opinions stayed split. Jeremy Corbell's 2018 documentary gave Lazar a new platform and a younger audience. The footage of an older Lazar sitting quietly at his desk carried weight. He looked tired, private, sincere. Former officials like Luis Elizondo and Christopher Mellon suggested the US government had materials of unknown origin. Not S4-level confirmation, but adjacent enough to keep Lazar's theory alive. Public perception shifted. He moved from crackpot to cult figure to something more complex and enduring. He did not tool or sell merchandise. He ran a chemistry supply store and often refused to cash in. For some, that restraint made him more believable, because the truth, they said, does not need to shout, it only needs to be told once and then it echoes. As Lazar's name faded from headlines, his life never returned to ordinary. From the moment he spoke out, he had been marked, not in a cinematic chase, but in quieter ways. He opened United Nuclear to move on, selling chemicals, lab glassware, and high-voltage gear. Even this attracted scrutiny. Regulatory agencies inspected his business often. Packages were opened, orders delayed. Some saw routine oversight, others suspected a quiet campaign to disrupt him. Lazar rarely spoke about it, but patterns emerged. His demeanor softened over time. The fiery man of 1989 became measured and sometimes weary. When asked if he regretted coming forward, he paused and answered that the cost was not worth it, not because he lied, but because of the harassment, ridicule, and friends who had stopped calling. His family felt the pressure, strange cars outside, the sense that phone calls were not private. It did not destroy them, but it never left. Yet Lazar never retracted his story. He did not monetize it with TV specials or book deals. His interviews remained rare. In one interview, asked if he feared for his life, he thought long before replying, "Not anymore. At first, yes. But after a while, you realize you're just a small piece in a very large puzzle. They don't need to eliminate you, they just need to discredit you." He described phones clicking, computers acting oddly, helicopters flying low at night, coincidences or something more. He did not speculate, he simply described. For decades he refused the spotlight, until 2018 when Jeremy Corbell convinced him to appear in the documentary. He agreed on condition the film would not sensationalize the story, it had to be quiet and personal. The premiere drew a mixed audience, believers, skeptics, and scientists. In a Q&A, Lazar spoke, hands trembling slightly, telling the same story he had for 30 years. No new revelations, only repetition that felt powerful. He was not adding to the myth, simply refusing to let it fade. Over time, Lazar moved from controversy to a fixture of UFO folklore. He became the man who never changed his story. That consistency, rare in fringe claims, was his quiet badge of honor. People traveled to his shop to meet him, not for chemicals but to shake his hand. Some cried, others stood in awe. Lazar would nod, say thank you, and return to work. A life of routine, but that past never left. If asked if he still thought about S4, he would say, every day. That was never in doubt. Decades later, Lazar's story evolved into mythic rhythm, not because it became folklore, but because it refused to die. It stayed alive through repetition, the same details, the same quiet calm in his voice. There was no need for embellishment. What he had seen at S4 was burned into him like a scar. He could not forget, and he would not, because to forget would be to bury something that should be known. The world shifted in small ways. In the early 2020s, stigma around UAPs eased. Military footage appeared, former officials testified, even NASA showed interest. The silence that once smothered the topic was breaking. Lazar watched from the sidelines. He did not seek validation, but noticed how public discussion echoed his 1989 claims about propulsion with no visible engines, objects with no heat signature, craft that defied physics. One moment stood out. A high-ranking official asked behind closed doors if the US had recovered non-human craft. The answer was not public, but rumors leaked that the answer was yes. For those who followed Lazar, that felt like confirmation, indirect but powerful. Online communities grew, Reddit forums and YouTube documentaries dissected every sentence he had ever spoken. New listeners were struck by the technical precision in his interviews. He did not speak like a hoaxer. He spoke like a man haunted. Some tried to pick up his trail, scouring Nevada for S4 entrances, analyzing satellite images and terrain against Lazar's maps, but nothing definitive appeared. If S4 existed, it had been buried deeper. Lazar never tried to return. He would say he would not get close again. The facility was protected by more than fences, layers of secrecy and deterrence, both physical and psychological. He held on to fragments, the layout of hangars, the glow of the craft, the way the gravity amplifier bent light. These were anchors, tethers to the impossible. In his shop he sometimes drew diagrams for visitors, a rough saucer sketch, the 3-reactor setup, the mysterious fuel always the same. Over time even some skeptics softened, admitting that if he was a hoaxer he was a consistent one, and consistency across decades is hard to fake. It does not prove truth, but it demands attention. In a noisy age of spectacle, Lazar stood out for his quietness. He did not yell or exaggerate. He told the same story, and that story retained a strange gravity. At its core, the Lazar tale is not only about sources, it is about secrecy, what governments might do with knowledge beyond comprehension, and the courage to speak. Whether you believe him or not, the story forces a question you cannot ignore. What if he was telling the truth? That question has echoed through desert winds and digital signals for more than 30 years. As Lazar aged, he did not vanish, nor did he seek limelight. He lived in the border between myth and man, running his supply shop, carrying a story too strange for comfort and too consistent to dismiss. He lived modestly with his wife, surrounded by ordinary furniture and workbenches, relics from his past, photos, papers, worn physics books, and notebooks with diagrams few would recognize. Sometimes he would flip through them, not dwelling on old glory but as a scientist trying to make sense of something still beyond comprehension. No headlines now, no cameras, just quiet recollection and visitors who asked softly, "Do you still believe?" He never framed it as belief, but as memory. It's not about belief, it's about what I saw. Once you've seen it, you can't unsee it. The weight of that memory lived in his posture, in the way he stared past the horizon. Friends who would speak said he never crumbled under ridicule, he never lashed out at critics, he never revised his story to fit new narratives. He simply remained himself, and there is quiet bravery in that, to tell a story the world will not hear and live with the consequences without bitterness. Lazar did not build a movement or form a cult. He never asked for money or loyalty, only that people listen and maybe show a little patience. Years brought waves of renewed attention, new reports, classified leaks, Navy pilot sightings. Each time Lazar remained steady, resigned rather than excited. There was sadness, not self-pity, but a kind of scientific mourning. What he glimpsed at S4 was elegant, a technology that could change everything, yet it was hidden in a dry hangar in the desert, far from those who might understand it. He once said, "If we had even a partial grasp of how that propulsion worked, we could eliminate the energy crisis overnight." Not hyperbole, just math. Gravity manipulation, if real, would transform engineering and our view of the universe. He rarely speculated on motives or conspiracies, he stayed focused on what he could describe accurately. That discipline held its own honesty. What he knew he shared, and what he did not pretend to know. In private he tinkered, built small experiments, played with magnetic fields and ion engines. The wonder never left him, it deepened. He rarely traveled, most days spent close to home and shop. The storm cloud of fame had largely dissipated. Visitors were surprised by his simplicity, no UFO shrine, just a soft-spoken man with sharp eyes and an enduring curiosity. When asked if he still thought of S4, he would say, "Every day." There were moments when he seemed content, standing outside at night, looking up at the stars in silence, perhaps the closest thing to understanding. In later years, Bob Lazar became a symbol, not a loud brand, but a quiet one that lingers. People point to him when they wonder if it is possible to hold on to truth, even when the world does not want to hear it. For UFO communities, he was a compass, not an answer but a question, a fixed point reminding them of strangeness hiding in plain sight. If even part of his story was true, it would mean humanity had already touched the impossible and then turned away. He gave few interviews, his voice slower and more measured, his hair thinned, features aged, but his eyes stayed sharp, the same eyes that once stared into the belly of a gravity-defying machine. Time could not erase that look. In a rare conversation, a journalist asked if he would speak out again, if he had to do it over. After a long pause he nodded, yes, because no matter what happened to me, the story is bigger than I am. That phrase explained risk, ridicule, and years of suspicion. When something extraordinary happens, when you touch the unknown, you do not get to walk away, it lives inside and asks to be shared. Toward the end of his life, Lazar rarely spoke of S4 unless asked, not out of fear now, but reverence, guarding a sacred text. There was weight, yes, but also a strange beauty, an awe he never fully lost. He often said the hardest part was knowing what he saw could help people, could change the world, and that it might never be allowed. That ache gave his voice a soft melancholy that lingered. At a small science symposium he did little, yet people gathered respectfully, no selfies, just hushed thanks. When asked for a final message he said, "Don't stop asking questions, and don't assume the truth is what you are told. Sometimes it's hidden in the silence." Silence defined Bob Lazar in the end, not because he did not speak, but because he left room for mystery. In a noisy world he chose stillness, and in doing so he became unforgettable. The questions stayed. Maybe that mattered most, not answers, but the urge to keep asking. The universe is wider and stranger than we admit. Bob Lazar was not a prophet or martyr, simply a man who saw something he could not explain, and instead of running he told the world. That is rare and brave, and whether you believe or not, it is worth remembering. Late at night when you look at the ceiling or the stars and wonder if the sky hides machines moving through dimensions we barely grasp, you might think of Bob Lazar. Somewhere between thought and dream, you may hear a whisper of gravity amplifiers, element 115, sport model, S4, a whisper that stayed with him and might stay with you. Bob Lazar's story never truly ended. It faded into the collective memory like a half-remembered dream. Whether you accepted every word or saw it as a reflection of longing for the stars, his tale carved space in the conversation about who we are and what might be watching us. Years moved on, governments changed, documents leaked, pilots reported encounters, and each cycle brought Lazar's name back, not shouted, but whispered, "He told us long ago." His legacy became folklore in the sense of persistence, a story passed quietly from one seeker to another, shared in dorm rooms and late-night drives, in forums deep on the web. Younger generations, born long after 1989, found themselves captivated, not because he had answers but because he asked the right questions. What is gravity really? Why do governments hide what they find? If something not of this earth was recovered, what would it mean for everything we know? That is the power of the Lazar story. It is about perspective and how fragile our grasp of reality might be. Many who heard the tale did not come away convinced, but they came away changed, the world feeling larger and doubt lingering, a mark of stories that last. Perhaps Bob Lazar was not only scientist, whistleblower, or myth, perhaps he was a mirror reflecting our desire to know the unknown, to pull back a curtain and glimpse what lies beyond. Even if the image is brief or unclear, it tells us we are not done exploring. Late at night, sitting in silence and thinking of sport model craft and gravity amplifiers and a hangar carved into Nevada Earth, you may not find answers, but you may feel curiosity and wonder, a sense of scale. Maybe his role was never to prove, but to provoke, to awaken a question that skepticism alone cannot silence, a question that keeps you looking up when nothing visible is there. In that sense, his legacy remains airborne, suspended above mountains and lights, between the known and the unknowable, waiting patiently for us to catch up. The desert is quiet now, the wind moves across Groom Lake, the facility, if it existed, remains sealed. But somewhere beyond dust and stars something might still hover, silent, waiting, perhaps remembering the man who tried to speak for it. As you drift into sleep tonight, let the mystery settle, let the silence speak, and let the story of Bob Lazar be a soft murmur in the dark, a reminder some truths hide not in what we know, but in what we dare to imagine. Good night.